Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's a sea of Ken Doan. It's very exciting to be here. My name's Penny, and I'm thrilled to be here talking to Ken. Can you wave to everyone, Ken?
Oh, look, I'm staggered. There's so many people who should take the time to come and be here. Thank you very much for that.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Ken, where do we start?
Well, it's the first book I've ever written, obviously, and I was very pleased to be asked to do it. People have, talked to me a few times about whether I would do a book, and I just didn't get around to it. But once I started, I really enjoyed it, and I don't have a computer, and I'm a very bad speller, so I had to write it out longhand on lots of notebooks and little scraps of paper. And then when that was finished, I think I'd written 140,000 words, and it was cut down to 80,000 to put it into a book. But it was a great experience.
And so it's good that we're actually talking about the writing process up front, because we're here at the Wheeler Centre. Did you find it hard?
Once I started, I could remember more about my childhood than I could about last Thursday. But once it was rolling, it all seemed to. It's like my brain was saying to me, "Look, you've got to just do this and get it out." And I really enjoyed it. There's no doubt about it. And when I finished the first thing, there had to be a lot of politically incorrect things taken out of the book, and a couple of defamatory things. You just can't help yourself. You think, well, I'm going to get that guy, and you just write it down. But
well,
you have to leave it.
I have to say, I was very absorbed by the writing, and I think you are a real yarn spinner. And I think that the book reads to me as though I'm just sitting there, and you're telling me stories, which I think is great, and probably what a lot of writers try to achieve and can't.
Well, hopefully it's like the painting, isn't it? You have some idea of where it might go. You don't want to make it so complicated that people can't understand it, so there are no kind of art speak words in it. In fact, there's not a lot of very complicated words in it when I think about it. It's like a conversation, which again is like art. Like painting's half a conversation. You never know what people will take from the painting itself, and I guess it's the same with the book. You don't know what people will take from it, but you hope they like it.
Okay. And you've talked about art speak there a little bit, and I was going to get to this later, because I really... I was really struck by a passage that you wrote, and I think you said something like, there was no bloody art speak, or what did you call it, double talk, or something like that?
Well, I was talking about when I went to art school. The major art school in Sydney is called East Sydney Tech. Now it's called the National Art School. And I went there when I was 14 and a half. I got a special exemption to leave school, which was like the equivalent of it's called the intermediate certificate in those days, but it's like the equivalent of year 10. And I was bright enough to be able to leave school, and because I was continuing to study, they allowed me to leave. So I was 14 and a half. I was very excited about going to art school, and one of the things that interested me most, I really wanted to see a totally nude woman, because I hadn't seen one up to that point in time, and at 14 and a half, I was getting ready for that, I think.
Did you say you saw one?
No. Well, funnily enough, you don't see it until the second year, which avoids lots of young guys turning up and saying, look, I'm an art student, take your clothes off. Right. So you have to go through a probationary period where you draw from plaster casts and things like that. But I will tell you this, I do remember the first life class. On a Thursday, started at 9:30. I was there about 20 to 7, basically. And you form a circle and you sit on a thing called a donkey, and you have your board in front of you to do the drawing. The model comes in, takes off her clothes, you do a short pose, a couple of short poses, then a longer one, then one for about an hour leading up to midday. And the art master goes around the back of the class and corrects the anatomy, essentially, of what you're doing. Never, ever came and talked to me. And I was really getting very worried about it because I can draw quite well. And I didn't understand why he wouldn't say anything to me. And finally, about 5 to 12, just before the class finished, he came and he leant over and whispered in my ear so the other students couldn't hear. And he said, "Don't you think it's about time you attempted the head?"
Oh my God. Amazing. So you did make it to the second year.
I made it the second year, yeah.
I know that there are a lot of designers here tonight and people who really will love to hear about your first kind of paid work, where you shifted to after art school.
Well, I left art school before I was there 5 years. I left before it finished on the advice of the principal of the art school. Said that I should leave because there was a very good job being offered in a studio called Smith and Julius. It's an old classic art studio in Sydney.
And when was this?
Important one in Australia. This is, I don't know, must have been about 19 or something. Lloyd Rees worked there, Sidney Nolan worked there, Roland Wakeland worked there. But it was essentially a design and an art studio. So I was very pleased to get the job. And I was in the job for only 2 weeks because another guy, and I was being paid £14 a week, which I thought was a considerable sum of money. And then I got an offer from a bloke who was the creative director of a big advertising agency, and he offered me 2 things. £28 a week, so it was double the money that I was getting. And the real clincher, I think, was he said that I could paint my office whatever colour I wanted. And so I painted it purple. 1959, it was a very important year for purple. And so for the next number of years, I then had a small design studio in Sydney. And then I went to Japan because I was very interested in traditional Japanese design and also contemporary Japanese design. I had no idea, obviously, at that time I'd become quite so well known in Japan. Anyway, I came back to Australia and I wanted to travel. Most people in those days went to England. I went to America, I went to Mexico. I just wanted to go a kind of different way. And I took a bus across America. It's like 99 days for $99. I'll tell you how I got on the bus. It's a brief story, but maybe it's of some interest. In the design studio that I had in Sydney, a man came to see me once, and he was the creative director of a very big agency in Chicago. And he said, "Look, I know that you're going to America. I would love you to come to Chicago to work for us." And I said, "Well, that would be great, but I don't have any real plans. I'm not sure where I'm going." Anyway, I got to Mexico City, and I got a phone call one night from this guy. He said, "I just want to welcome you to this side of the world." Well, I thought that was very nice of him. I didn't think anything more of it. Anyway, he said, "I want you to go and see a friend of mine in Los Angeles." He gave me the name of this bloke. I went to see him. I was staying in a fairly crummy motel down near Hollywood and Vine. Anyway, I went to see this bloke. And he said to me, we'll go out tonight, he said, to a club. It's called the Daisy Club, of all things. It's actually still there in Los Angeles. He said, "What would you like to drink?" The Bond movies had come out, so I was a bit into sort of vodka and stuff like that. I said, "I'd like a vodka and lime." He said, "I don't have any vodka, but I'll send out for it." For a young Australian, boy, that's amazing.
Yeah, wow.
Guy can send out to get a bloody bottle of vodka. Anyway, it came back, we had the drinks, and he was talking to me about the bloke from Chicago. His name happened to be Woody, maybe his nickname. Anyway, he said to me, "Oh, Woody was really impressed by your work." I said, "Thank you very much." He said, "Did you get a chance to sleep with Woody when he was in Sydney?" Well, like I'm a kid from Australia. I got a seersucker suit and a little bloody briefcase. I'd never even heard those words before. I mean, now I would know perfectly how to handle it, but it really surprised me.
Wow.
And so I said something like, I really like that wallpaper over there, because I wasn't sure what the answer to that particular...
Polite.
I wasn't sure what the answer was. So we went to the nightclub, and I danced with anybody that would any girl who would dance with me. I danced with the hat check girl, with the chef, with the waitress. I could see this guy looking at me all the time, and could be nasty. Anyway, about 2 o'clock when we were leaving, he was absolutely insistent. I actually don't know why I'm starting telling you this, but I'm stuck with it now. He was absolutely insistent that I came back to his apartment. Well, I used the only excuse that a lot of you girls here will be familiar with. I said, look, I've really got a headache, you know. I've just got a headache, but I promise I'll come around in the morning. So I went back to the motel that I stayed in. I rang Judy, quite what she was going to do about it. She was in Sydney. I checked out of the motel. By 4:30, I was at the bus station in LA. I said, where does the next bus go? They said, it goes to Elko in Nevada. So I was on the bus. When dawn broke, I wasn't in this guy's apartment. I was in bloody Elko, Nevada. And even when I went all the way across America, when I went through Chicago, I kind of ducked down in the bus, just in case this guy might have been watching, you know.
And so you didn't get any work from that guy?
Not from that guy. I didn't choose to. But look, he was a very nice guy. And as I say, it was the inexperience and the immaturity of a young Australian boy.
This was
Nowadays,
the 60s,
it'd be totally different. But I was hired in New York.
I thought so, yeah.
I was hired in New York by a very big advertising agency, J. Walter Thompson. And I couldn't get a green card to stay there, but they...
What was it like there? Was it like the TV show?
It was worse than the TV show in that sense of the word, but it was very much of that Mad Men era. Like on the 8th floor where I worked, I was given a very modern office, and all of the top creative people, they could furnish their office any way they wanted to. The guy in the office next to me, he had an oak floor. He obviously was like kind of like New England things. Had an oak floor. He had a ship's wheel in the corner. He had a big bar models of ships, and a kind of, you know, like a marine desk that he worked on, and occasionally would wear a peaked hat. Absolute wankers in those days. Unbelievable. But it was that time of Mad Men.
But you weren't there for too long, where you went to London.
I couldn't get a green card to stay, so they asked whether I would go to London, which I did. And I was very fortunate to do it. I had a couple of offers, one from David Ogilvy and one from J. Walter Thompson's, and I was so fortunate that I chose Thompson's, or that they chose me. So when you go to an agency like that, if you're a young art director, as I was, and especially if you're from Australia, I wouldn't say you could get away with lots of things, but you couldn't be put into any particular class or category. You simply came from Australia. You were either good or you weren't. You could either do it or you couldn't. And you work with a writer. And so I was introduced to this young guy who was the writer that I was going to be working with. Strange, thin guy, little poppy eyes, but very good writer. And after about 2 weeks, I suddenly, his name was Llewellyn, I suddenly realised who he was. He was Dylan Thomas's son. And he was a terrific writer. I convinced him eventually to come to Australia. And Lou and I worked on some really quite astounding things in England.
Didn't you pitch for the Beatles campaign when they launched the White Album?
We did. When the Beatles were going to launch that White Album, Thompson's a very establishment agency in a beautiful dining room, and they'd had Brian Epstein to lunch one day. And the Beatles' publicity manager in those days, a bloke called Derek Taylor, Australian guy. Anyway, Lou and I were given the job to do a deal with EMI for the launch of that White Album. And I, first of all, obviously had the problem of what image do you use? What image do you use for the beat? Well, they're so big, you don't need there's no picture. You don't need to show people what they look like. You need the kind of confidence and arrogance of almost doing nothing. And that's essentially what we did. We planned to do a whole series of 4 pages in The Observer or the Sunday Times or something like that. No image at all. but just some tiny little words in the middle of the page that related to the album. I can give you one example. And Llewellyn wrote these. I didn't write them. These are really good. Well, I think so. In the middle of the full page on the Sunday Times magazine, we had written, the new Beatles White Album will be released today. All the albums are numbered. It is confidently expected that the lower numbers will increase in value. In other words, you wrote the copy in tune with what the publication was, right?
Oh, that's good.
I remember the day. Look, we presented it. The Beatles were in the thing called Apple. They were in Savile Row in the Apple headquarters. And when we went in, it was my job to make the presentation. So I went in there. There's maybe 20 or 30 people all sitting around. I think I say this in the book, lots of short skirts and very short, tiny jumpers, and that was just the guys, you know. And anyway, Paul Asher, who was part of the publicity group, who was Jane Asher's brother, and when I was starting to make the presentation, he said, "Oh, wait a minute," he said, "I think Paul might want to hear this." And I didn't even think about what particular Paul he might mean. Anyway, Paul McCartney came in, throwing an apple up and down. It's a tiny bit pretentious, but, you know, it's Paul McCartney, and it's his bloody business. He can do whatever he liked. So it was interesting to meet him.
Wow. And you had to pitch in front of Paul McCartney?
When the pitch finishes, I don't know whether I said this in the book, when the pitch finished, we went outside into Savile Row, and Llewellyn found a £5 note on the floor, like on the pavement outside. So the first thing we have to do is go and have a drink, really. Now, the pubs, I think, in England in those days didn't open till midday. But in London, there's always places you can get a drink. And we were with one of the directors of Thompson's, and he took us to a fairly kind of nondescript doorway in Shepherd's Market. And opened the door, and I remember all these stairs going up. You go up the stairs, and it's like going back into the early 40s, you know. It's a lady playing the piano, old bloke behind the bar, few old guys having gin and tonics. You could always get a drink in England if you... And, of course, Llewellyn, that's what he liked to do. And it turned... Llewellyn and I had lots of liquor accounts that we worked on, perfect for both of us.
I was going to ask you about that, because I think there are a lot of people here who were born after Photoshop.
Look,
Can you just talk about actually making an ad pre-Photoshop?
Look, I'm very... I don't have a computer, so... But I know people who do, and obviously we have them in the studio. But yes, I am of the crayon generation, basically, in that simple. But what it led to is we had the Bacardi account. And when I first got involved in the Bacardi account, they used to have little black and white ads by a guy called John Glashan, the Scottish cartoonist. They're quite nice, but they weren't sensual. They weren't about rum. They didn't have the feeling that Bacardi should have. And it's the fourth James Bond movie came out. It was shot in Nassau. It was shot underwater. I thought, that's what we have to do for Bacardi. And so I designed an ad that had, and it was a deal with Coke, a Bacardi bottle and a Coke bottle in the top of a coral head with two people diving down to get it. And so, you know, we presented it to the client. They said, yeah, that's a very good idea. Can you do it? I'm an Australian. Of course I can do it. Well, I didn't know how to dive at all. And they said, look, you know, go to Nassau, you'll find a girl there and, you know, she can be the model. I said, well, you know, I've just been married and my wife is a model and we could do it. And anyway, Judy and I had to go to the White House Hotel in Regent's Park, learn to dive. We got a photographer friend of mine to make us special housing. This is no one knew too much about Hans Hasswood or what was that other guy who did underwater stuff? Sorry to throw that question, darling. Anyway, the short answer is Cousteau. Jacques Cousteau would have been the only person in the world with the bloody equipment to do it. We had to have it made. Anyway, we flew to Nassau. We were processing the film in the bath at night because you needed to know whether you had the picture or not. You know, because we had the job, Judy and I, of going to Bermuda on the way back to London, where the Bacardi family lived in a house fairly pretentiously called Bacardi on the Rocks. But again, if you're the Bacardi family and you've got a big house, of course that's what you're going to call it. So we had to hire a boat. We shot for about 3 or 4 days, but I knew we didn't have the picture. I knew it wasn't right. And quite a big storm came up. And when the storm comes, there's a lot of plankton in the water, a lot of sand in the water. It's not clear enough to shoot. So we had to wait. We had 1 day left. And I was desperate to find a coral head that was within, 2 or 3 feet of the surface. Feet, that's old language.
Because you wanted the...
Yeah, you have to see the sunlight has to come down. I mean, nowadays you could do it in a garage in Morty Alec. You wouldn't even have to go anywhere. But in those days you have to do...
You had a tuna can behind the Bacardi so that...
I did. We found the coral head. It was at the end of an oil refinery. The only thing they said to us, look, they throw the garbage off this wharf quite regularly, so there could be some sharks around. Well, we're scared of sharks. We're Australians, but you had to do it. So we found the coral head, we put the Bacardi bottle in, we put the Coke bottle in, and you're right. You take a can of tuna or sardines, you jam it with a knife, the little flakes of kind of oil come up, and you want the little fish swimming around it to make the picture. Nowadays, as I say, a 5-year-old could do it on a computer, but you had to do it for real. So we did one dive. I knew we still hadn't got the picture right, so we went down for the second time, and halfway through that second time, the assistant took off his mask and just sort of sat there for a while in the bottom of the ocean. So I obviously had to push him up to the surface because clearly we'd been underwater for too long. It wasn't the right thing to do. We all had to finish the shoot. We rushed back to the motel. We got on the plane. The rest of them went back to London. Judy and I flew to Bermuda, quite a flash hotel in Bermuda. It's called the Princess Hotel. It's a big pink hotel. So we got there about midnight, and Judy had a lot of difficulty breathing. I said to her, it's that stupid bra you're wearing. That's what it must be. I said, give me that bra. I'm going to rip it in half. That's just not the right... Well, men will know you can't rip a bra in half. You have to be bloody Tarzan. You give yourself a hernia trying to rip a bra in half. So I have to call the doctor, and the doctor eventually comes and says it's obviously all to do with the diving. Anyway, we sorted that out. We showed the Bacardi family the pictures. They loved them. And it meant that for the next 5 years, each year we would plan a Bacardi campaign. We came back here to Australia to do one. We did in Dunk Island. We went to Acapulco. We went to Portugal. You could do anything in the advertising business if it works. If it works, because that means it's, making some money for a client. So advertising business, quite an interesting business, and I had some great times in it. It's just, I got to the stage I didn't really want to do it anymore.
And when was that?
I could tell you precisely when it was, not to the day, but I'd come back here to work for J. Walter Thompson in Sydney. One of the first things that I did when I came back here was to come to Melbourne. There's been still are, I'm sure, great designers out of Melbourne, always for, I don't know what reason, anyway, great designers out of Melbourne. And there was a design symposium down at Lawn, it was one of the first things I did when I came back, and I realised how exciting the sort of design business here. And who are those food people that? They're a Melbourne couple in the food business. Anyway, they became great. You see, I'm starting to lose it a little bit. Anyway, I'll think of their names in the middle of the night and call you up and tell you. Jill Duplay and what's the guy's name? Terry Durack. They were both in the business, as was Fred Skepsey, as was Bruce Bereford, as was Philip Adams. If you wanted to make a commercial in those days, if you came to Melbourne, Fred Skepsey would direct it, or Bruce Beresford would direct it. All of those guys it was advertising that gave them their chance to do those things. Same in Sydney with Peter Carey and John Singleton. And again, Philip Adam. It was all out of the business.
It's pretty amazing, actually, to cut in people of our generation, I think, to read your book, because a lot of these people were just your contemporaries and people you ran into, but now they're like Lord Snowden, and Clive James.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're just like, oh no, that was that guy I worked with.
All right, if you go back to the Lord Snowden, I can only give you half of this story. I'm afraid you have to buy the book to see the other half. but maybe it's of interest. Llewellyn and I were working on the Campari account, and we were asked to do a series of cinema commercials for Campari. Anyway, they ended up being written by Bill Oddie and Tim Brooke Taylor, who went on to become the Goodies. And I did the picture, they did the words. And they were very successful. They were so successful that they won the award for the best cinema commercials in the world in 1967. And we were obviously very pleased about that. So then we had to work out what we do next. So I wanted to work with some of the really top photographers in London, series of 4-page ads where we would allow the photographer to do whatever they want and sort of put their signature on the bottom. This is the 60s, and this might have been done later, but this is the 60s. Anyway, the real prize photographer was Anthony Armstrong-Jones, who had then become Lord Snowden, who had married Princess Margaret. And I had the job at a lunch to talk to him about whether he would be interested in taking some photos for us, because once he'd married Princess Margaret, we didn't know whether he would work again. So anyway, we have a very big lunch. It's very nice. He suggests that I come to his place the following Thursday to talk about it. So I'm going to Kensington Palace. I'm wearing a suit. I've been going to the loo about every 10 minutes late in the afternoon. So you go to Kensington Palace. You're expected, obviously. The butler takes you into his study. It's quite a small room. Very nice little Sidney Nolan painting on the wall, and lots of pictures about Japan and about Princess Margaret. So he'd only just been married, and I'd only just been married, so we talked about that. He knew bugger all about our wedding, and I knew a lot about his. And I knew about the Nolans and things like that. And then he said to me, have you heard about the moving platform that he designed? Well, fortunately I had. There'd been a thing in the Sunday Times about the fact that he designed this little sort of flat thing that you could take whatever chair you felt comfortable in, and had a little handle to go back and forth. And so you could be mobile, like a little wheelchair. He said, look, I'd love you to have a look at it. And I said, look, I'm not an industrial designer, but you can't say no, obviously. So he calls the butler again, and the butler brought the platform in, and I got it. And I'm not mechanically gifted. And so I was very, very careful I'm driving up to his desk, and then I drive back to the bookshelves, and the phone rang, and he's on the phone. So I'm still driving around this little room. I go over here to the bookshelf, and I'm sitting there. And the door opened in part of the bookshelf, and Princess Margaret walked in. Well, it really gave me a surprise, because it's obviously her house and she can come in whenever she wanted to, but I wasn't expected it. And so I did something that I can only describe as like a half limbo, half curtsy, something to signify some kind of, respect and reverence. And he's on the phone, and she said to me, "Who are you?" And I heard myself say, "I am an Australian."
Amazing.
And that was it.
That's so weird.
What I really wanted to say is, look, I'm an Australian art director, I'm working with your husband, you're going to do some great pictures, but I am an Australian would cover the fact that if my hand inadvertently went down her blouse, or if I was sick, or if I farted, I am an Australian would cover it all.
Yeah, amazing.
There's more to that story, but
I know.
Just in case there's somebody from MI5 here, I can't tell you the rest of the story.
Well, that's a great segue, I think, because can you talk to us about what it was like coming back to Australia after you decided you'd had enough of the rain and London.
You are struck by the light of Australia, and you are struck by the optimism, and you're struck by the space. We'd been very fortunate all those years in London. We'd travelled a lot, and we'd been fortunate there. But I remember it was one very wet Sunday. We had a little Mini. We had a couple of friends, so there's 4 of us in the car. We went for a picnic in Great Windsor Park. It was so wet you couldn't even get out of the car. I said, "Oh, bugger it, that's it, we're going home." So we did. We came home, and my dad met us. The Opera House hadn't been finished. We went across the Harbour Bridge. We went home. Mum had done the lamb roast, the potatoes, the peas, everything, the pavlova. You knew you were back, and we were very, very pleased to be back. Yes, it was a wonderful day.
And you started really focusing on your painting not long after that.
Well, I'd been painting all the time, but I just never imagined when I left art school that I would spend the time in the studio, because I wanted to travel and do some of those things that I've been able to talk to you about. I came back to work for J. Walter Thompson. I eventually took over Bryce Courtney's job. Look, it was really interesting those last 3 or 4 years. I'd come to Melbourne quite a lot.
You met Kerry Packer?
I'm sorry?
You met Kerry Packer?
I had a very interesting time with Kerry Packer. Very interesting. He's a very, very interesting man. I met him twice. Once when he was the most charming man imaginable. A second time when he wasn't. But again, that's there's a bit of rude language in there, so don't have your kids read that part. So I got to about the ripe old age of 35, and even though I'd been painting all the time, or maybe when I was about 33, I said to the chairman of the company, "Look, I only want to work 4 days a week. I want to spend 1 day a week painting." And he said, "Okay, don't come in on a Friday." Now, advertising in those days, on a Friday, it was always a Friday lunch. And for those of you who would know Chinatown in Sydney, it's a great Chinese restaurant called the Taiping, like the flower drum here. So you would go to lunch on Friday. It would finish, I don't know, sometime in the early hours of Saturday. It was long, boozy time. So the chairman said, "Look, we'll just tell the clients you're not going to be there on a Friday." I said, "No, I'll come in on Friday. I'm not going to come in on Monday. I want to start the day doing what I want to do." And for any of you who may be familiar with some of my earlier works, there's quite an interesting painting which is called Trying to Paint on a Monday. So it was making that transition between being in an advertising agency where you're constantly surrounded by people telling you you're good, bad or indifferent, or that kind of interaction, to a situation where it was just me and the dog, basically. I did a good painting, the dog would bark twice. And so I had to make that change because I didn't want to do advertising anymore. I didn't want to solve any problems that other people set for me. I wanted to be a painter, and I knew that if you want to be a painter, you can't talk about it, you can't pontificate about it, you can't dream it. Well, you could dream about it. You have to do it. You have to do it. For any of you here who are painters, or you like to paint, or you like to draw, you have to realise what a joyful thing it is. Every single person in this room was a painter when you were young. Before you could draw, before you could walk, before you could talk, you could make a mark. And when you were, 5 or 6, you could make fantastic marks. And if you stick your head up a bit in Australia, of course there's some kind of criticism you get. I'll give you an example. I think it was about 1986, when people were really starting to see what I was doing in a design area. I was in Canberra Friday night in the airport, about to get on a plane, and a guy called me over. He's a businessman. He's got a suit and a tie and a jacket, briefcase. He said, "Are you Candone?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I've always wanted to meet you." I said, "Oh, thank you very much." He said, "I know that no one else in the world likes what you do, but I think it's great." So I thought to myself, well, bugger me, no one else in the world, that's a pretty big number. What about Mum and Judy and the kids and the dog? I mean, I knew what he meant. Even then, maybe I was going up a different kind of track that's not the traditional one that Australian artists do. Yeah, and then if I can jump back to, it's only a couple of years ago, I had a big exhibition in the Tweed Regional Gallery of reef-related paintings, which your beautiful sweatshirt, wonderful, comes out. Mind you, that's a painting from 1984. Nowadays, you can digitally print a painting straight onto a T-shirt. Anyway, I had a big exhibition of lots of, serious reef paintings, as beautiful as I could make them. And in every exhibition, there's always a book where people write their comments. And of course, you want to read them. But you have to wait till there's not too many people around, because it's a bit of a giveaway if you just rush across and quickly turn over all the pages. Anyway, I waited till there was no one in the gallery, and I rushed across there and I looked at all the comments. And most of them were terrific. So you think, well, thank you very much, people with a bit of taste and style. But the one that I remember most of all was from a 10-year-old girl in Murwillumbah, and she had written, "Really, Ken, I can do better paintings and I'm still in primary school. Next time, try harder." Which I like that comment.
Very honest.
I can't do paintings better than kids in primary school. Of course not. Kids in primary school, especially kids under 7, unbeatable. But the concept of next time try harder, I find that very optimistic. And they have asked me to have another exhibition there, and I said, well, I only have it if you call it Kendo Trying Harder.
Trying harder. You used the word serious when you were talking about that, and I think you did a serious exhibition recently with the submarines.
Sydney I did. I had a big exhibition in Sydney, which was about the attack on Sydney by Japanese midget submarines. It was a serious subject. It's about death. It's about drowning. It's about the seriousness of war, even though it didn't set out to glorify war. And it was the first exhibition of mine that was seriously reviewed. And of course I was pleased about that. But I would say a bunch of flowers is serious too. It's just a matter of how well you do it. And it's not annoying, but it's just strange, I think, that people chose that. And I got prostate cancer, less than amusing, but I was operated on a Friday, I was home on Sunday, I was painting on Wednesday, and I did nothing else but these paintings. And they did get quite a lot of publicity, but, well, there you are. Here's something that I am doing. Now, this is serious. I'm having an exhibition, I'm part of an exhibition in the National Portrait Gallery in November of artists and their pets, right? And I've done 4 portraits they're all dead, of our last 4 dogs. Now, you'd never imagine that your little dog, end up in the National Portrait Gallery. I mean,
that is
good.
Amazing.
That's serious. Yeah. That's serious.
I was really struck by that idea that a flower is very serious in some ways. I really like that.
Well, take Van Gogh's Sunflowers. That's a very serious painting. It just happens to be beautiful. It's all right to use words like beautiful. It's all right to use words like pretty. There was a time, and hopefully we're moving past that, then, you'd go into a gallery and there'd be, half a dozen badly tuned television sets and a pair of fireman's boots and a half-eaten sandwich and a wall text telling you that it was art. Well, maybe it wasn't, Maybe it was a load of crap. That's not to say that, I'm not against all installations. Some of them are great. I'm not against anything, but I am a painter. Paint. That's what I like to do. Mm.
Not an artist.
Sometimes
you sometimes use that word.
I've brought this upon myself because I've done it in earlier talks. I do make the distinction between artist and painter. I think you can only you know yourself when you've been an artist. I am a painter. I'm not a sculptor, even though I've done sculpture. I don't do installations. I don't do all of those things. I don't know how much time I've got left, but I need to spend it painting. I just sometimes, people will come to me and they say, I've just finished art school, now I'm an artist. And I have to say, well, maybe not. Maybe you should go and and paint 500 pictures, and then we can talk about painting. And then I say this jokingly, but I mean, if somebody comes in who's really, really, really talented, I say, look, I think you should be a dry cleaner, because it's a very competitive business, art, and the last thing you need is lots of smart young people coming along doing fantastic things.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I think I got a real sense of abundance and joy from this book, which I think in Melbourne we don't have that much of. I mean, I felt when I was reading it how I feel when I go to Sydney, which is sort of just, whoa, this place smells good, you know, in some ways, and it's brighter and people are happier. And
well, no, I don't know that. I mean, I have great respect for Melbourne artists, Melbourne artists, and Melbourne designers.
People aren't agreeing with me.
Melbourne's produced. No,
I want to hear what Ken has to say about Melbourne and Sydney.
Melbourne's produced some of Australia's greatest artists, absolutely greatest. I don't do the Sydney-Melbourne bit. Like, I worked a lot on the Olympic Games. Camilla and I worked with Rick Birch. And I think the Olympic Games are a good example where I hope everybody felt something for it. But yeah, we're very lucky. We live in Sydney. We live beside the harbour. We're very happy to do that. But look, as a country, we are experienced enough and sophisticated enough to know the one thing you need to know is how lucky you are to live in Australia. If you wake up and you live in Australia, this is not Baghdad. You know, this is a fantastic place in which we all live.
Do you think that that feeling has faded?
Well, you know, when people first saw my work, it was the 80s, very nationalistic time. You know, it was the time of World Series cricket. It was this time when the World Cup, the America's Cup was on. I think we all, you know, felt very strongly. I think the difficult thing now is that we're just absolutely bombarded with imagery on television every night about how tough things are in the world. That's why I think, for me, painting should be more like poetry. It should give you pleasure over time. I don't try to do paintings to shock people because I think we are, in a sense, unshockable. And young painters, especially when they try to do things to shock you, almost inevitably will fail. So I think television has given art the opportunity to be something else. But it's always half a conversation. It's what you feel about it. It's what you take from it. There are no rules. A painting, if it's good, it'll give you pleasure, and you can never add it up or categorise that.
I think it was, who was it from Vogue who said, you can hang a dome on your wall or you can hang a dome on yourself.
Yeah,
how does it make you feel?
I was very pleased to hear that quote, and it was a good one. And all I've ever asked for people to judge me by what I'm trying to do. If it's a piece of design, was it a good swimsuit? Is it a good sweatshirt? Was it a nice, pareo? That's one thing. That's design. On the other side, is it a good painting? It's up to you. It's up to you what you feel about it.
Well, that's a great chance for us to throw to our first question. Have you all got up your courage?
I've been coming to the Wheeler Centre for 7 years. Thank you very much. This is the best night ever.
Thank you.
I don't need a question. I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
That was great.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Who's next?
Thank you. Come on, that was a good answer.
That was a great opener, Ken.
That's a great opener. That's right. Thank you.
It strikes me that your art was very popular across a very broad section of the Australian population, but there isn't a great deal in terms of art that is today. Do you have any comment about that?
Of course, you never start, you set out to just do the best things you can. And what happened in Australia is, at the start, young Japanese responded to my work, because young Japanese women especially were changing society in Tokyo, and they took a lot of things back to Japan, and it was a very strong time for the Japanese. Anyway, that led to opening a little, the first shop that we had. And we made things that people seemed to like. And then people want to do licensing arrangements, like Sheraton had a license, they do Bentley, and Oraton had a license, Hale. So suddenly you were starting to see it everywhere. And people did like it and did respond to it. But almost inevitably, that changes because people try to knock it off. And there was a stage there where if anything was in bright colours, people would say it would be mine, which was not flattering because a lot of times it was crap. But sometimes, I'll give you an example. And these weren't crap, they weren't too bad. The uniforms for the volunteers at the Olympic Games. I was at a function, I don't know, a couple of years ago, about this many people in the room, and a guy who was, well, it was John Coates, right? He ran the bloody Olympic Games. And I was in the audience, and he was kind enough to say, oh, and that's Ken Dunn down there. He did the uniforms for the volunteers. Well, no, I didn't. I didn't do that at all. But some people may have been influenced by those things. And people sometimes would say, all he could do was tea towels. We only did 2, They were just the Sydney Harbour drawing and something else. But, people, once you simplify things, it's very easy for people to knock it off. The best example I can give is somebody bought me a T-shirt which was a Sydney Harbour drawing that I'd done, absolutely line for line. You had to look very carefully. It was very, very, very well done. You had to look very carefully at it. The thing that gave it away is where I would write Sydney Harbour underneath. These people had written Gulf of Thailand. Well, that's... There may be a lawyer or here tonight, but I mean, surely that would give you a clue that this is not the bloody real thing. So that's part. And then when something becomes very popular, and we had 3 shops here in Melbourne. We used to come down here a lot. We had a shop in the Como Centre, a shop in the Block Arcade and Melbourne Central. But then it gets to the stage where people think, oh no, I don't really like it anymore. And that's quite right. That's the way kind of fashion moves. And people get sick of it. So you start off at the bottom of the circle and people love it. They think it's great. They think it's fantastic. And then they think, no, it's not fantastic anymore. And then wouldn't be seen dead in it. And then, crap. And then you eventually come down and a younger generation said, hey, that was pretty good. We could buy that on eBay. And we're somewhere there at the moment. And of course, people are understanding that was design, but the last 30 years have all been about painting. It's almost as if people have to forgive me for the success of that first part. Even Tim Storer said to me once, he said, mate, you should have 2 names. You should have a name for all the design work and a name for the painting. No, this is what I do. And I was very proud of not just me, the whole family of what we did in that area. We won. Here's something that actually bugs me only slightly, so you won't tell anybody else. Like in 1981 or 1982, we would be doing the first T-shirts, and even some of them with koalas on for the Japanese market. I could draw koalas so cute that 9-year-old girls would faint by their very cuteness, because that's what it set out to do, right? That's like 1981. 1993, we won the Grand Award for Fashion in Australia. For fashion, That's a big journey. And as you know, at the National Gallery in Victoria at the moment, there's an exhibition called 200 Years of Australian Fashion. We don't get a mention. Ooh, that's what I thought. Anyway, you move on. Okay, another question. Yes, no, there's one right up the back.
Make sure you got the mic.
Hi. My question's actually, you've sort of half answered what I was going to ask anyway, but I had a white koala t-shirt when I was 7. in 1995. Loved it. And then a few years ago, I thought, like, oh, wouldn't that be cool to, you know, you're talking about the spiral, right? So I thought about it again. I thought, oh, wouldn't that be cool to bring that out again and wear something like that? And so I went to your online store and couldn't see something that fitted what I was looking for. And then I went to the store in Sydney, and then I went back a second time, and I saw these beautiful coloured T-shirts you had for children and had for women, like case in point, what our host is wearing, which I think is fabulous. But all the men's stuff had interesting things, but not that kind of super bright. And is that a reflection on the market of men today? Are men too scared to wear bright colours?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I didn't hear all of it, but I got the sense of it. Now, there's a very, very good young Australian painter called James Drinkwater. He won the Brett Whiteley Scholarship last year to go to Paris. Anyway, he came to see me a few weeks ago. I was having a big exhibition in Sydney, and it turns out that he's, you know, been a fan for a long time and said some very nice things about the painting. And we do have a little shop in the gallery where Judy and Camilla, you know, we have some art tops and some wonderful silk tops for women. Well, he bought one of those. So, I mean, it's just the attitude that you have to colour, isn't it? I don't know whether that answers your question, but it's the bit I could understand from where he was. Okay.
We've got next question.
Another question. I'm sorry, I think there's someone up there.
Ken,
Yeah.
being a very proud Australian, can I ask you what you think of the nude artwork on the new $5 note?
Look, it's a hard one to answer because there's already a comment on Twitter that used my name in a derogatory sense. I had nothing to do with the note at all. I won't say to you whether I think it's good or bad. What I will say to you is this. The most important design opportunity in Australia is a new flag. And at some point in time, we will have one. And that is a very important thing. The note, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think it's great, but who cares? And it's not my track. They're never going to ask me to do a note. Although, you never know.
Have you got a current design for the flag?
Oh yeah. Look, Australians have already decided that our colour is yellow. Go to any sporting match, any team, that's always yellow. And yellow's a wonderful colour for us to have. When it's green and gold, often we get the green wrong and the yellow wrong. If I was the design dictator of Australia, I'd say to you, this is the yellow, this is the green, move on. Because a lot of the times they're wrong and we end up looking like a bloody pineapple salad. No? So if you get the yellow right and if you get the green right, it's good. So the only next question is, will it be the Southern Cross or will it be a kangaroo? The problem with the kangaroo, it's not quite serious enough, but it's a fantastic symbol. So you'll find in the book there's four designs for the flag. The strongest possible thing that you could do is that you could take the Federation star and you could put that big in the middle of a blue background. So you would have about the same proportion of yellow as to blue. And it would be as strong as any other flag in the world. So I think that it's like the Olympic uniforms. We never get them right. You know, they look like bloody bank managers on holidays. We've got to get to the stage where we are stronger, and there would be nothing stronger than a really bold, big yellow flag. But who knows whether it'll happen. We're not fighting about it in the streets, and it doesn't matter. But maybe it'll happen one day.
Hi, thank you for coming. Just like to know your most favourite painting that you've painted and why it would be your favourite.
It's not a new question, and I always have to answer it by saying I think it might be the next one, but I think that that's a bit too glib when I think about it. There are a series of paintings that that over the time I've kept or that I remember well. I've not met him, but there's somebody in the audience here who's got 3 of my paintings, and they're really good ones. And one of them, a yellow painting about the reef, is especially important to me because it shows that when I'm diving and when I'm going under the reef, this is a slightly more literal picture. This is from 1954, this picture. Decorative, slightly more literal picture from my lovely interviewer here, my barrel girl.
Is this the one?
Yeah, no, it's not that picture. It's not in the book, but it's quite a yellow picture. It's called Leopard Coral, and it tells me 2 things: how you can use being under the water to lead to something else, because it's not the colour that's under the water, and it's called Leopard Coral because I wanted to call it that because there's nothing. Leopard coral doesn't exist. It existed in my head, so it shows you the difference between photography and painting. But I'm ready to, once I finish this tour, I've got a whole new set of canvases for some new works, and I'm enthusiastic about that. Okay.
Hi, Ken. I want to ask about your current paintings, and I guess just or maybe I'm projecting here, but maybe your possible struggle with people to take your current painting seriously, and whether or not your background in advertising has affected that, and whether, if you could do it again, whether you would still do the advertising or whether you just go straight into painting.
It's a good question, and it's sometimes I think about that, but the answer is no, I wouldn't change a minute of it. The fact that the problem was that I was quite good at advertising and I was quite good at design, and so it set up a kind of situation that in some people's minds it was a bit kind of, something that, designers should stay in one camp and painters should stay in the other. Well, no. In the time in which we live, James Morrison's a good mate of mine, right? Good musician. Puts out his own records. Why not? To have your own gallery is just like a chef owning a restaurant. So I think I can only come back to saying people should judge by the paintings themselves, not the name that's in the corner. And yes, it did, and it does still get in the way, but nothing I do about it. That's it. You either like what I do or you don't. And it's like, I've been hung in the Archibald Prize a number of times. When I'm hung, I think they're people of great taste and style and clear vision and understanding. When I'm not, I think they're a bunch of dickheads that wouldn't know a good painting if it fell off the bloody wall and hit them severely on the head. So all depends on your point of view.
Ken's book, Ken Doan, A Life Coloured In, I might seem very biased, but I would say it is just a wonderful book, and I encourage you all to read it if you can get your hands on it. And can you please join me in thanking Ken for tonight?
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.